Why don't you wear a suit? You're at the highest level in this country's office, and you refuse to wear a suit.
I will wear a costume after this war will finish.
Okay.
Yes, maybe one.
Maybe something
like yours. Yes.
That'd be great.
Maybe something better. I don't know. Yeah. We will see.
There is, of course, no reason to take even slightly seriously the confected outrage of US President Donald Trump and henchmen at the sartorial choices made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky when he visited the White House last week. Zelensky has worn military fatigues these last 3 years to emphasize to people at home and abroad that he is the commander-in-chief of a military fighting an existential war. Winston Churchill did much the same when he went to Washington, D.C. in 1942. It is not unimaginable that Zelensky also intends the khaki as a memo to self, as a constant reminder to the comedian-turned-politician that he is now a soldier and must therefore think as a soldier does, practically, decisively, and quickly. Unlike one or two of his recent interlocutors, Zelensky does not have the luxury of time or space in which to whine interminably about how dreadfully unfair everything is to him personally. Accordingly, Zelensky's only reaction to the news that President Trump has paused all military aid to Ukraine will have been, okay, now what? War, for its manifold unpleasantness, is remarkably clarifying. You work with what you have, rather than dwelling on what you haven't. It is, of course, possible, Trump being Trump, that by the time you hear this, he will have executed another of the tire-shredding reversals which are a hallmark of his governance, and restored or even bolstered assistance to Ukraine. As of this recording, it is reported, or at least feverishly speculated, that Zelensky may return to Washington. It is obviously ridiculous that Zelensky might now be wondering if the fate of his nation hangs on whether or not he wears a tie, but here is another of the compromises with circumstances that conflict necessitates. However, Ukraine and every other country in Europe would be wise, henceforth, to proceed on the assumption that the United States is no longer the reliable backstop of the post-World War II decades, but is at best indifferent, at worst actively hostile. Which prompts a question that matters rather more than any sartorial dilemmas. Can Ukraine and its European allies continue resisting Russia absent American help? It won't be easy, though Trump has, as is characteristic, cited vastly inflated amounts. The US has been, and by some distance, the largest individual donor to Ukraine. US intelligence has also been invaluable to Ukraine, and US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has confirmed that the sharing of this intelligence has also been paused, a development which will please nobody more than it does President Vladimir Putin of Russia. The most immediate and most important drawbacks of a suspension of American military assistance will be a weakening of Ukraine's air defenses, especially the US-built Patriot anti-missile system, and a scaling back of Ukraine's own long-range missile threat. There are no readily available European replacements for either, although among the promises made in recent days to Ukraine by its European allies are 5,000 UK-made light multi-role missiles with some air defence capability. The good, well, maybe at least not terrible news, is that Ukraine's own defence industry, what with one thing and another, has become a big deal. Ukraine has had to become, a major innovator in drone warfare. More than half the casualties Ukraine is inflicting on Russian occupiers are caused by drones, and Ukraine is on target to build 2.5 million more this year. Ukraine is learning the hard way every day what works in 21st century warfare and what does not. Ukraine's military is indisputably formidable, fighting to a standstill a much larger invading force, commanded by people indifferent to horrendous losses among their own troops, for 3 years is a heroic accomplishment. As Europe rearms, it will have much to learn from and eventually buy from Ukraine. President Zelensky's boast that Ukraine is building the arsenal of the free world is not an idle one. Inside NATO, Ukrainian membership is regarded as a colossal potential asset, not some charitable liability. But there is still fighting to be done, and the prospect of having to do it without the US holding Ukraine's coat. Unless, of course, there isn't. The generous, extremely generous interpretation of President Trump's rhetoric is that he deliberately adumbrates extreme positions in order to force others to break locks and cut knots and bring about the result he really wanted all along. Maybe there is something to this. Witness the summit of Arab countries in Cairo earlier this week, scrambling to sketch a future of Gaza involving fewer casinos and water slides. And maybe there isn't. Maybe Trump does just vent whatever mad nonsense pops into his untenanted head from one moment to the next, whether it will do him any good or not. Trump's crass bullying of Canada since being re-inaugurated has single-handedly brought Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party back from the dead in pre-election polling. If they do end up winning, they should send Trump flowers.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Nevertheless, in diplomacy as in war, what counts are outcomes, not intentions. If Trump's boorish bloviating does bring about a secure Ukraine and a better defended Europe, he will be entitled to some credit, though much less than he will claim. If he is preparing a betrayal of America's allies, he will deserve substantial blame, though much, much more than he will ever accept. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.